Hi, this is Jay Strachey with Drilling Contractor. Today, I'm joined by Elizabeth Craddock, Vice President of Government and Industry Affairs for IADC. Ms. Craddock recently gave a presentation at the IADC Drilling Onshore Conference, providing an overview and look ahead of 2020 energy developments for the U.S. Congress and White House. Liz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
In your presentation, you noted there have been amendments added to two appropriation bills that could potentially prove detrimental to the energy industry. Could you tell us a bit more about these amendments and their potential impacts?
Sure. Well, just for a little background, there are two appropriation bills that are of most importance to the oil and gas industry. The first is Interior Appropriations, which funds the Department of Interior, where BOEM and Bessie are housed, along with BLM. The other is Energy and Water Appropriations, which funds the Department of Energy. So what we saw happen in the House of Representatives, who has passed 10 of the 12 appropriations bills, consequently there are 12 appropriations bills that have to be passed every year to keep the federal government open and running, was a litany of sort of amendments that were sort of what we'd consider poison pills for the oil and gas industry. Two in particular, the first was a amendment that was passed to ban any further development of ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Reserve. And the other was to ban any funding for any lease sales for the NPRA up in Alaska as well. So the Senate consequently has not passed any of its appropriations bills. And given that there are some Senate champions of ANWR and NPRA who are on the Appropriations Committee, I find it highly unlikely that these provisions will be included in the Senate measures, and therefore it's highly unlikely that these amendments, which again we would consider poison pill amendments for the oil and gas industry, would move forward and actually become enacted into law.
In July 2020, the Trump administration finalized some major changes to the National Environmental Policy Act. Can you talk a bit about what impacts our industry can expect to see and when?
Well, for background, for those who may not know, NEPA was signed into law in 1970 and is a procedural statute that requires federal agencies to assess the potential environmental impacts of proposed major federal actions. So the Council for Environmental Quality, or CEQ, oversees NEPA, and it has not comprehensively updated its regulations in over 40 years. Many will say that the NEPA process is broken and there are significant delays in getting a project environmental assessment or environmental impact statement needed to get through the NEPA process. And ultimately that stalls much needed infrastructure and energy projects in the US. So this month in September 2020, the final rule changes to NEPA will go into effect, seeking to improve the management of the NEPA process by establishing presumptive time limits for 2 years for the preparation of environmental impact statements and 1 year for environmental assessments. And ultimately, all of these changes, the goal is seeking to speed up the NEPA process so these stalled infrastructure and energy projects can move forward in a more timely manner.
And you also mentioned in your presentation that the government is moving to allow for lease sales in the National Petroleum Reserve and Arctic National Wildlife Reserve in Alaska. Can you talk about what are the steps that have already been taken to make this a reality and what other actions we can expect to see from the Trump administration in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, so ANWR is an interesting topic because it has been debated in whether to open it in DC for, since I was a little girl, so a long time ago. But in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there was a provision for opening up ANWR's coastal plain to oil and gas drilling. And it ordered the administration to hold at least 2 lease sales within 7 years. So since then, the Department of Interior has been going through the regulatory process, the notice to comment period for opening ANWR leasing, and on August 17th announced that it is intending to authorize ANWR leasing. There's no date yet for the lease sales, but one is expected in 2021 and the other one is expected in 2024, which will meet the statutory deadline of holding at least 2 lease sales within 7 years. So regarding the NPRA, in 1923, the 23 million acre National Petroleum Reserve was allocated as an emergency naval oil supply. In the 1970s and 80s, Congress ordered protection of wildlife and habitat during oil and gas exploration in the reserve. And now in June 2020, the Interior Department has announced a proposal opening 18.7 million acres for leasing, expanding leased acreage by around 60%, making 82% of the NPRA open for oil and gas drilling.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak with us. We really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching us at drillingcontractor.org.